Friends, welcome to another episode of Work, Life, Play, where we want it all. Today, my guest is Liz Warner. And back early in the pandemic, she was on her way to completing her goal. So the punchline is she made it. And what that was this big, cool goal of 30 marathons in 30 countries by her 30th birthday. Well, Liz Warner is exceptional and amazing. And at the same time, she's just super normal, human, has a life, a career, a husband. Like there's not much that would have said she got a special letter in the mail that picked her to be the one to take on this big feat. No, that didn't happen. What happened was, just like me and you, she decided to give a punch to the humdrum in the face of life and said, what if I did something kind of wild, kind of inspiring, kind of cool? So you're going to hear about her Run to Reach organization that she started. And this is her story about navigating the setbacks along the road of illuminating that each of us, this trail, this path that she's helping show us, the way that we can contribute to what Walt Whitman calls as the ongoing play. So what will your verse be? Liz made 30 marathons in 30 countries by her 30th birthday. Her verse so far. You can do this. This is good for us. Let's keep going. Hope you enjoy it. Liz Warner, welcome to the Work, Life, Play podcast. Tell us about Run to Reach.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on. I launched Run to Reach at the beginning of last year, so January 2019. Basically, for the past 7 years since I ran my first marathon, I had become completely addicted to running and traveling all over the world to run marathons. So I had already run 10 marathons when I came up with the idea of Run to Reach. And essentially Run to Reach, my goal is to run 30 marathons in 30 countries before I turn 30. And in each of the countries in which I would run, I have partnered with a local women-focused charity in that country to go there and raise awareness about what they do and also fundraise for their cause. The past year has been pretty crazy. I basically did 60 marathons in a year and in some pretty peculiar, interesting countries like Afghanistan, Madagascar, Mongolia. I really tried to choose countries that were a little bit off the radar and not so often traveled to. So yeah, that's sort of the gist. And I'm now 28 marathons in. I have 1 month to go before my 30th birthday. And obviously with all of the races being canceled, I am now actually organizing my own around the world virtual race, which has been a beautiful silver lining in this whole project now, just involving more people in my races.
That's cool. So you basically are creating your own race, inviting people to attend and participate themselves. That's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When do those happen? When are they scheduled?
So this virtual race is scheduled for next Sunday, actually. And what's so cool about this virtual race, I really thought to myself, obviously there are many virtual races going on now. So I was just, I thought to myself, what could I do to make mine a little bit different or, more interesting? And so I've been putting a lot of effort into reaching out to runners truly from all over the world. And so my goal is to get runners from 100 plus countries involved in this race. So just today I had someone from Bhutan sign up. I have a few runners in Iran who just signed up. So really it's a truly global race. And I'm also fundraising for the WHO's COVID-19 response fund. So I'm also really trying to tie in what's going on now with the global pandemic and this whole crisis period. So yeah, I mean, it's I have a lot of respect for for race organizers now, because it's not at all something I was expecting to do in this whole project. But it's, again, like I said, it's been a really wonderful way to involve more people in my project. And also it's made fundraising a lot easier, even in this very difficult time financially for the world. I feel like people are, empathizing with the world around them, because we are all going through this really terrible time.
We're all united, turns out, right?
Yeah,
Turns out
exactly.
we need each other.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I have some questions for you. So I'm just thinking about it so you're very near your goal, which is amazing. How cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. It's very fun. And what I'm curious about is if in the beginning, your motivation, your design, your aspiration for this, compared to in the middle, what changed, and what were some of your early assumptions, beliefs, convictions that you found really challenging to continue, and you may have had to pivot and, I guess, find new motivation to keep going. So take us to the beginning, and then put us in the middle, and then we'll go back to where are you today?
Yeah, great loaded question. So at the beginning, what was, I think, really difficult about Run to Reach was that I had literally 2 months to plan everything. In retrospect, I really wish I had 2 years, because, all of these marathons, some of them were a week apart from each other. And so even just not only figuring out the marathon schedule, because I was running all organized races, but, coordinating with 20 different nonprofits, figuring out travel logistics, figuring out my budget. And so, I think when I started this project, I was just so excited about life. I had all these expectations, even I sort of assumed it would be really easy to get a sponsor and, a big sponsor to help support me. Like I just dove deep really quickly in this project, and kind of in a very naive way as well. Like I didn't really know anyone who had done something similar like this before, or a similar campaign. And so I really had to figure out everything on my own. And I mean, now looking back, I obviously learned so much because of that, but it definitely made, probably like 2 or 3 months into the project, I definitely hit a point where I was like, whoa, I'm spending way more money than I thought. I don't have as many like connections and contacts to help me, gain momentum, because at the same time, I literally started from zero with this project. Like I had zero credibility. I had 0 followers on social media. I really had to build everything up from scratch. But, at the same time, 6 months into the project, I had been traveling for 5 months straight without even going home. I went back to the US actually and had sort of a month off. And that's when I totally reassessed my project and pivoted. And I actually, at the beginning of Run to Reach, I was working with many different types of organizations. And I was actually choosing to travel to countries that I personally really wanted to go to travel to, like Cuba and the Seychelles. And then 6 months in, I was like, no, I need to choose a theme amongst all my organizations to make my message tighter. I need to really travel to places that would not only be super interesting for me to see, but also would be really eye-opening for the people who are following my journey, to expose them to all these different cultures. And so I really scrapped all the work that I had done up until that point and just start over. And I've had to do that a lot, I think, over the course of this project, to just continue pivoting. And, I've become more interested in a different aspect of the project. And then towards the end of last year, like probably 3/4 way in, I hit a complete burnout period where, I think when you're traveling nonstop for that long, it like all the glitter and excitement begins to wear off, of course. And I think all the finances just became really stressful. And, you also stop appreciating sometimes all the places that you get to see. And, again, because fundraising had become really difficult, sometimes I'd be traveling to a place and not really raising that much money. And it's like, what's the point even now, So, I definitely hit a point where I, was questioning why I was doing the whole project to begin with. And, but then luckily I had a really good support system around me. My husband, who has sort of been, my biggest supporter. I don't know how from day one, because actually when I came up with this idea, it was during our honeymoon. He had just moved to the same city as me.
Poor guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I married him essentially, because he would say yes to these crazy ideas too. But
let me ask you, would you mind if I paused you for a second?
Of course.
I want to go back to, in the beginning,
yeah.
Was it more of a vision of a running project, or was it more of a vision of like a personal adventure project? Was it more of a vision of I want to do some good in the world project? Yeah. Like, what's the core of the mission that you began with?
Really a mix of those three. But I think, my background actually, before I did Run to Reach, I had been working in marketing communications for 6 or 7 years. And I knew that no matter what I did, it had to be something like there needed to be a hook with the project. And so this whole idea of running 30 marathons in 30 countries for 1030, like that was the hook. But I knew that running was only going to be 1% of the project. It probably was a way that I was going to, bring people into what I was doing, target other runners who might be really interested in this project. But really, I knew from day one, the core and the driver of Run to Reach was, again, shining light on some of the incredible organizations I've been really lucky to work with, and really digging deep into what they do and traveling to these countries to learn more about the issues. There were maybe a few trips that I got to actually spend maybe a week or so traveling around, but a lot of these trips, I really just went there, worked with the NGO for a week, or like figured out a way that we could put together a strong awareness campaign about what they do. Then I ran the marathon and then I left, So it really was focused around shining light on these organizations that I've partnered with during this whole journey. And sort of the running part, running the marathons, it felt like my day off. It felt like the one day that I was like, okay, I don't have to worry about marketing or like reaching out to a million people on email, coordinating with all the NGOs.
That's good to know. And I would imagine like in I'll just call it our Instagram culture.
Yes.
That, and maybe I'll just ask a question. Is it okay if I just ask you some real direct questions?
Yes, please go for it.
I imagine, seeing you on video here and just getting acquainted with you, that, it would be easy for people to potentially dismiss you as, oh, this is just somebody trying to be Instagram famous, versus this is someone trying to actually do good in the world.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to raise money, the first beautiful women on Instagram doing cool, amazing things, exotic locations can take you really far.
Yeah.
But that's again why I was asking, like, okay, so then in the middle, how does that actually work when it's like a grandiose, cool idea with a great strategy and a 30-30-30, like that's all really cool.
Yeah.
And it turned out this stuff is actually really hard to do. The running, that's helpful to hear that the running is only 1%. But I would love just to hear a little bit about like when you then found yourself in the middle of the story. 15 in, the day off is actually to go for a run. And you have this lovely husband supporting you, which is amazing. That's cool. What were some of the reasons people didn't want to help, even the NGOs, or didn't want to fund? And then what were some of the things that you learned about yourself along the way?
I was hyper aware of the type of image that I was giving off on Instagram. It's sort of, I think with social media in a way, personally for me, I'm not someone who, I was never trying to be an influencer with this. And I think even you can see on my Instagram, I never have promoted products, very rarely. Again, if it's, I worked with several sponsors, but it was very rare. And I, to a certain degree, getting people wrapped up in this project, it's also, how do you gain attention? And at the end of the day, with Instagram, it's sort of a tool for people to, it's like an escapism tool, like a tool for people to sort of look on there and lose themselves in thoughts and dreams and especially travel. So in a way, I knew I needed to plan that in order to get people to pay attention to the other stuff I was going to talk about, which was issues concerning women in all of these countries. And a lot of stuff that I was talking about on my Instagram, it's not always sexy or interesting topics that I think a lot of people go on Instagram for. And so I was very conscious of how I had to balance that, because at the end of the day too, I didn't want it to just be about travel and, just beautiful pictures of me running in all these exotic destinations.
Right.
But I do firmly believe that you do need some sort of balance, because it can't be one or the other.
That's probably where your marketing background probably helps too.
I mean,
have like some thoughtful strategy around how do we craft the story so that it is compelling.
But I did get some backlash. Like, of course, people were like, "Who is this privileged?" Or like, "What is your story? How are you financing?" I would get these questions all the time, and at the beginning, like, I could tell, my husband, it really bothered me, because I also felt like sometimes these questions were very intrusive. And I think another kind of strange thing with Instagram is like, people, once they start following you for a very long time, they think they know you. And it's, it's also a very strange world on there. But then, now if anyone were to ask me, I'd be very transparent. And I do think that, people looked at what I did and they kept saying, this is so inspiring. And I think when they ask these questions about like finances, it's just because they want to know potentially how could they do this in the future themselves. And I really respect that. And I think it's also, you do need to be transparent sometimes, but again, you have to balance that, because I also think that there needs to be some sort of boundary with Instagram. And I was not about to go on there and talk about my marriage problems or like whatever, really personal
the fight
stuff.
My husband and I just had. Yeah. Good call. Well, I think what's cool, and the reason that line of questioning is important to me is what I love about your story is that you've done something really bold and audacious and really dreamy and whimsical. And what I think is really helpful for people to understand is, even when we start with those kinds of dreams, visions, what ifs, we don't have to have all the answers to begin them. And we can just start moving forward and experimenting, trying things, but know that there'll be days that will come where, especially when you're in the middle of whatever the quest is, there's a great book, Chris Guillebeau wrote, called The Pursuit of Happiness, or The Happiness of Pursuit. Yeah.
Yes.
And about this idea of, it's not actually the accomplishment of the quest. It's the journey that you have to learn to love.
Absolutely.
Because there's always going to be shit days and setbacks.
Yes.
And, as Taylor Swift says, haters are going to hate. So they're going to be them too, right?
Yes. I think even when looking back a year ago, this journey has been all about creating my hard shell and sort of, not being so offended by certain comments and, actually being, accepting criticism, not criticism, but just feedback, because again, that's how you grow. That's how you learn. That's how you're able to see different perspectives. And I think I definitely feel much more open to discussing certain topics. And I did say it towards the beginning of this whole project.
Tell us about your favorite run so far.
Ooh, that really feels like choosing between children.
Yeah, pick one of your
favorites. Okay. I mean, I think truly one of the most life-changing trips on this whole journey was going to Afghanistan. And it was just a very charged trip in general, because basically there was a waiting list to go on this trip, surprisingly, and to run this marathon there. My mother was very unhappy with me going. And it was, I think I put myself on the waiting list in April. The trip was in October. And it was maybe 6 months of me just like going back and forth and her just being really, really angry about it. But, I went there. And again, so much of this journey has been about going to these countries and sort of smashing any preconceived notions of the place that I had prior. I think, of course, it's always the people that you remember the most. And I spent all this time with this group of Afghan women runners who I'd be running the marathon with. And I was supporting the organization that they were a part of called Free to Run. And then the marathon itself was beautiful. It took place in this national park north of Kabul, 100 kilometers north of Kabul, in this area called Bamyan. And it was just, these towering canyons and these turquoise lakes sort of sprinkled throughout the national park. And the marathon itself was tough. It took like 9 hours to complete, but just the landscape was stunning. And again, you would never sort of put these two, Afghanistan with a beautiful sort of backdrop, these two ideas together. So I think that's what also just made it so memorable.
That's so amazing. So tell us about, you mentioned people.
Yes.
They stand out as some of the, even beyond the running,
yes,
the humans themselves. So tell us
yes.
about a couple of your favorite humans.
A couple of my favorite humans. I've made really good friends on this trip, especially meeting some cool other runners at the marathon who have then come to join me on different parts of this trip. I always think back, my time in Afghanistan, and there's one girl I actually became particularly close with. Her name was Hosnia. And she was about my age, maybe actually a few years younger, 23. And she was a project manager for Free to Run, the NGO I was working with there, that basically they provide safe spaces for Afghan women to participate in sport, just because in Afghanistan, it's not acceptable at all for women to just go out for a run. It's actually quite dangerous. And so she lives in probably one of the most conservative parts of Afghanistan where women are fully covered head to toe. One night we're having dinner, and what was also really striking about the conversations with some of these Afghan women is that they were just open books. And she was just telling me this horrific story about a few years back. She was at her university in Kabul and was walking to her class, and there was, this huge bombing that happened right there. And a number of her classmates had been injured. A few of her professors, unfortunately, were casualties. Again, we read about this stuff in the news, but to actually hear a story from someone that's sitting across from you and you're actually just totally wrapped up in your relationship with them and sort of connecting on all these different levels, it just was a really sort of earth-shattering moment. I still talk to her all the time on WhatsApp and Skype, and we've sort of continued our relationship. And when I think back, so many times people are like, oh, what you're doing is so inspiring. And for me, it's like, these are the inspiring women to me and the inspiring people on my journey. And, I'm not also going to a lot of these countries and I'm not saving the world. It's the people working at these organizations and the people living in these countries that are actually, they have the courage to really try to change the system and the environment. And so I think that's also a message that I really try to communicate a lot, is that, yes, like I'm doing this crazy project, but it's really just to shine light on the work that's being done in the countries themselves. It's really just to showcase their incredible work.
And is that discovery for you, is that news to you compared to when you started the beginning? Because what I hear in that, I'm not saving the world, it's like the NGOs are, that's a lot of humility. And I wonder if in the beginning, if you had that sobriety to the work that you were about to go do.
There is this notion of like white saviorism, and I have always been very conscious of that, even to a point where like I have a complex about it, where I'm so scared of coming off like I'm going into these countries and saving these people, because I'm not.
Person showing up to do good.
Yeah, I knew I need to be really careful with the kind of image that I wanted to put forward, and by no means, was I going to go to some of these places and try to claim that I was, saving these communities.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That's really, I think, special, actually. Well, what stood out to me when I received the message from Kate about having you here on the podcast is what I look for is I look for real. And I look for no BS and no phony, no plastic, no perfect, no. And so, and a lot of times I get requests that are infused with lots of the other. So what I loved about yours was just this long obedience in the same direction. And you're not there to your finish line yet. And now here you are being disrupted and having to pivot again. And even just hearing some of the intent that you have as your, this campaign, this quest that you've had, this crazy wild idea, and you're really close, but it's not done yet.
The last 2 races in this mission, they were supposed to be really cool. My last race was supposed to be on Everest, actually. But really, if I had to choose between doing this virtual race and the planned races originally, like the virtual races are so much cooler. So I am feeling really grateful for this new opportunity that has come out of a somewhat miserable situation.
Right.
Yeah.
An unfortunate upset.
Yes.
Well, I love it. And I love that. Yeah. The reality is this is what life looks like.
Yes.
We can do our best to plan.
Yeah.
And go big and dream big and swing for the fence.
Yes.
And shit happens.
Yes.
And the skill is actually what do we do now?
Yeah.
So what a great example of, I wrote down like Everest versus virtual. So that's a pretty big, that's a good marketing headline.
Yeah.
30, and it was either Everest or virtual. So I chose virtual, and here's what we learned.
Yes, 100%. And, I think this whole year, there have been so many moments that have not gone to plan, and you just have to make lemonade out of lemons. Like that is what life is about. And that is the biggest lesson. I mean, I've always tried to live my life that way, but I think now it's like, what was so crazy about the last couple months is, so my 28th marathon, I was actually on this very remote island off of Somalia in Yemen. And I almost got stranded there, like before this whole lockdown period started. And I did not have internet for maybe the 6 or 7 days I was there. So I had no idea what was happening in the world around me. Like travel bans were going into place. I finally got service once we actually got kicked off this island. And, I received so many messages from friends and family, sort of preparing myself, Liz, as soon as you get back to Paris, I'm so sorry, but your project either needs to be postponed or like people will understand. Don't worry. And, I didn't want to postpone my project. I'm really ready to wrap this up. And there's always a solution. If you're going to fail, there's always a way to figure out how to pick yourself back up. And so yeah.
Well done. Well done.
You.
Have you ever seen the movie, Liz, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
I have. It's been a long time though.
It's worth a rewatch.
Okay.
And, he finds himself in Yemen also, which is kind of funny.
Okay, maybe I haven't seen it. Yeah.
It's very, it's super quirky, but if you're cool with the idea of a story having a mythic reality to it, and if you watch it as a literal film, it's quirky enough to be distracting at moments, I think, for some people. But as a mythic reality is like this guy steps forward in his life. And when he steps forward into the unknown, all kinds of things surface that would have never been possible had it not been for just the letting go. And then what's cool is what emerges is totally unplanned. There's no way you could script it, but is way more beautiful than had you scripted it. Yeah. So it just reminds me of some of the adventure that you're living here. So
I love that. I want to watch that movie this weekend. It sounds very fitting.
Well, great. Well, where can we find all of your work and Run to Reach?
So the website is runtoreach.com, RUNTOREACH. Same thing with Instagram, Run to Reach, Facebook, consistent Run to Reach. And I also launched recently a final fundraising push to try to get 2,600 people to donate $26 ahead of my final 26 miles. So it's a bit of a stretch, or it's a bit of a reach, but again, this has been really the main purpose of my project, is to raise money to get people to empathize with causes that are way beyond them. I think that's also a whole another topic of discussion. I'm feeling really optimistic about the world, even during this crazy period. Like, I feel like there's this renewed sense of consciousness and compassion towards others. And I feel actually very good about humanity at this moment. So
that's great. Well, good. And
yeah.
especially for the countries that you're reporting from, right? You're on the front line, seeing what humanity is actually like, not what the news feeds us.
Yes.
So I love how you're giving us, here's from my vantage point, here's what I see.
Yeah.
Here's what I experience.
Yeah.
And here's, this is an adventure. A buddy of mine calls it a story worth living.
Yes, exactly.